This is a story that I heard about years ago. Oh, it's got to be well over 20 years ago, and I was totally fascinated by it. Hello, I'm Keith Woodhouse, and this is another video in my series of pub chats, fireside chats without the fire, whatever you want to call it. I don't edit these, I just go straight through. So if there are any mistakes, I slur my words, say the wrong things, I'll just carry on. So it is just as if we're sitting talking in a pub. I was driving along one day and I was listening to the radio, and funny enough, it was Radio 4, and they were reviewing a book. And this book was a story about the Oxford English Dictionary and how it came about, or rather, part of the book was about that. And I was absolutely fascinated. You would think it could be the most boring subject on earth. And I was absolutely fascinated by it. And I pulled up at home and I literally sat outside for 5 or 10 minutes listening to the end of this so as I could find out the name of the book. And I came in and my wife thought I was ill. She'd seen me out there 5 or 10 minutes. And even though she thought I was ill, she didn't come out to see if I was all right. But anyway, I sat in the car and I listened to the end of this program and found out what the book was. And it's all about this fella called Dr. William Chester Minor. And he was an American or American citizen, but he was born in Ceylon, which is now obviously Sri Lanka. And his parents were very, very wealthy missionaries. So he's brought up in a strict religious family. And they were preaching the gospel to the Ceylonians, Sri Lankans, but they were preaching the gospel to them. And he had this very religious background. So when he reached the age of 14, his family sent him off to America to get educated. And he had a brilliant mind, apparently. He had an absolutely brilliant mind. And he studied and became a surgeon. Now, this was at the time of the American Civil War. So as he was up in Connecticut, I think it was, and he studied at Yale, he went into the Union Army as a surgeon. And during that period, he saw some horrendous things, saw some horrendous injuries, he saw much suffering on the battlefield, and this must have affected his mind. But the one thing that came out of the book was that he was either involved or witnessed the branding of an Irish deserter from the army. And what they did was they branded a big D on his face. And it really did affect Minor. And he never recovered from that. The book is called The Surgeon at Crowthorne by Simon Winchester. And I remember going into Waterstones to get this book. And I walked in and you could see the fella look at me, from behind the counter. And as if to say, oh, he's coming for the latest Viz annual or the boys' bumper book of football clubs. He's not serious. So I said, have you got The Surgeon at Crowthorne by Simon Winchester? And this bloke's face lit up. He said, no one's ever asked for it. He said, we've got one copy. And of course, working in a bookshop, I think that he probably had a love of words and reading and things like that. And he got sick. So I thought he was going to ask me to marry him, to be honest. And he said, we've got one copy. And he went off and he found this copy. Luckily, it hadn't been nicked. But I suppose it's not the type of book that does get nicked out of Waterstones. But anyway, he's got this copy. And he's given it to me. And I took it away. And I must say, the whole book was not really my thing, but the story of William Minor was so interesting. It really was so interesting that I was engrossed, and I think it takes about half, three quarters of the book on his story, and the rest is on about, like, the words and things like that, which wasn't really that much of an interest to me. But Miner, his condition got worse while he was living out in America, and his family decided, let's give him a change of environment and maybe it'll help his recovery. So they sent him off to England, where actually it got worse. And he was living in a house, an apartment, whatever. And he had these delusions that there were Irish people who wanted to kill him because he saw or actually branded this Irishman. And as I said, I'm not quite sure whether he actually saw it or just had to witness it as a surgeon. And he carried his service revolver with him. He would always go everywhere with this big pistol, So I don't know what the firearms law was in Victorian Britain, but he was just wandering around the streets of London with a gun, right? Plus, he's mentally unstable. But of course, there were no systems in place to check these people and to help them. So he's wandering the streets one night, and he used to go out walking at night. I think he'd found it difficult to go out during the daytime, and he had these delusions that they were hiding. These people were hiding in the cracks in the floorboard. That's how ill he was, and he was getting no treatment, no help whatsoever. And he's wandering the streets one night in Lambeth, and he comes across a fella who he thought was an Irishman that had been sent to assassinate him. And he pulled out his gun and he shot this fella, a fella called George Merritt. He was a brewery worker on his way to work in the early hours of the morning. He was shot by Miner, killed instantly. And I assume that the shots rang out, and then you had policemen on the beat, and it didn't take them long to pick him up, arrest him, and take him off and charge him. So Miner stood trial, and the obvious course was to hang him. But the defence argued that he was of unsound mind, so therefore he wasn't responsible for his actions, and they decided that they wouldn't hang him, and they would commit him to Broadmoor, which was an institution for the criminally insane to keep them locked up. And of course, Broadmoor still exists today and holds some of the most notorious criminally insane people that we have in this country. And it's up at Crowthorne. And I have actually been up there once. I was up there because there's a village around it. And I was up there on business and had to visit someone who worked at Broadmoor. And I was surprised at the size of the place and also the village that was around it. As I remember, there were a lot of allotments as well, and they seemed to grow their own food there. There was probably therapy for the inmates. Anyway, Merritt's dead, by the way. Miner, he's sent off to Broadmoor, and because of his status as a doctor, they gave him certain privileges. He wasn't confined to his cell. He was allowed to have books, and also he had a servant, which I find extremely odd. But as I understand it, he had a servant, because I've read other things. So whether this isn't in Simon Winchester's book about that, or I've got it off the internet, and as I say, always check what I'm saying before getting into an argument down at the pub quiz. But as I understand it, he had a servant as well. Anyway, Merritt's widow obviously struggles. There's no safety net for people in Victorian Britain. You either sank or swum, and that was it. And the society did not seem to care, or the people who were in a position to care about people in poverty didn't care. And she was left with children. I'm not sure, 4, 5, 6 children, and of course she struggled. She was in a mess. She really couldn't. She really couldn't live, and she couldn't feed or clothe her children. And she was in a terrible state. And Minor sent her messages asking her to visit him. And eventually she did visit him. And she could see that he was repentant, but she still hated him with a vengeance. Of course she did. I mean, he killed her husband, ruined her life, ruined her children's lives. Of course she hated him. And Minor offered money. He said, I've got a pension from the US Army. What I'll do is I'll give you that pension, and then you'd be able to survive. And she said no, she wouldn't take it. She hated him that much. She wouldn't even take his money to help the family survive. So she left, and then Minor sent other, because of course he couldn't pop round to see her because he's locked away in Broadmoor. So he had to keep sending messages in the hope that she would respond and come and see him. So she did go back again to see him. I suppose she was intrigued as to why he would want to keep seeing her. She was just an ordinary working class woman, and probably had no education and couldn't understand these things. So she kept visiting Minor, and eventually she agreed to take his money. She agreed to let him fend for her and her family, which of course it made sense, to us looking from the outside, but to her, she probably thought, this is blood money, And they did actually make a film of this, and it was called The Professor and the Madman. And that stuck very much to the story, but of course it's got embellishments in it, which the book didn't have. But at the end, they do say that it is based on Simon Winchester's book. But there is a film in it. So if you get the chance to see the film, The Professor and the Madman, I would definitely recommend it. I think it's Mel Gibson and Sean Penn, and Natalie Dormer plays Eliza Merritt. But anyway, coming back to Minor. So he's locked away in Broadmoor, and I don't know what he's doing on a day-to-day basis, but he had all these books he could read. He had the servant to polish his shoes and get him his dinner, I suppose. And he heard that there was a project to I suppose it's develop the Oxford English Dictionary, which didn't exist, and no one had ever put it down. Dr. Johnson had tried, but it was very, very limited as to what it was. And academics at Oxford, they wanted to give a definitive list of words in the English language, and the idea was they would sell it. Because at this time Britain had all the colonies, so everyone spoke English all around the world, and they was thinking we could sell it in America, we'd sell it in Canada, Australia, all these different places that they could sell it. And so they had this project, and they brought in a fellow called James Murray, who led the project. And Murray was obsessed with it. Totally obsessed with words and getting this dictionary made. And he had a family, he had a wife and children, but his total passion was words, and he managed to persuade them to let him take over this project. I suppose they had a lot of candidates in there, and he was the one who got the job. So he put out a call. He said, we're not going to be able to do this on our own. I think he had a few blokes working for him. And he said, we're never going to be able to do this on our own. We need help. So he put out a call asking for volunteers to help in tracing the origins of words, the meaning of them, evidence of usage of the words. And they could then use all this information, put it all together. And of course, they're all doing it on scraps of paper, no computers, obviously. So they're doing it on scraps of paper. And when you think, if someone said to you, right, let me just think of a word, just any routine, I just looked out the window, define garden and the usage of it, and give me the earliest example of it being used. And of course, to actually define what garden means is very, very difficult. So you're talking about one word there, and that's just a word off the top of my head, right? Let alone all these other words that you go on. Sky. Did you define the sky? And then you could say, oh, yeah, Bible. They mentioned the Garden of Eden. I'm sure that it's probably mentioned a lot before that. And these people were researching back and back and back to find the origins of these words. So they've put out a call. I think it was all around the empire, saying, can you help us in this? A miner, he heard of this and he volunteered his services and he threw himself into it. He absolutely threw himself into it. And what he was doing was he was finding out the origins of the words, quotations that was used, citations, as he could prove where it had come from, and definitions, which was the most important thing in a dictionary, is the definition of the word. That's really what you're looking for, isn't it? You look it up. I mean, with the internet now, you just go on Google, don't you? And bang, up it comes. But then, of course, you had to refer to a reference book, and those reference books did not exist. So this is all the start of it. A miner actually provided tens of thousands of words for them. Tens of thousands. He was sending in citations. He was sending in the origins. He was doing the lot, and he was writing it all down. But when you think about it, right, he's locked up in Broadmoor. There's not a lot else for him to do, is there? It's not like he's going to pop out for lunch or something like that. I can't do it today. I'm going swimming in the afternoon. He's stuck in that room, right? So he's just thrown himself into this, absolutely thrown himself. And this is a true story. This is not fiction. This is an absolute true story. And James Murray was getting these through on a regular basis, and he'd have a stack of paper, all come from Miner. And it's coming from Dr. William Miner, Broadmoor Prison, or Broadmoor, because it's not a prison. And it's coming from Broadmoor. So Murray one day thinks, I've got to go and meet this fella. He is doing more than anyone, more than him, more than his employees. He's doing more than anyone. I've got to go and meet him and see how he does it. So he just turns up at Broadmoor and says, I've come to see Dr. William Miner. So he's taken in, presumably, I don't know, security's lapsed. He didn't need a visiting order in those days. He'd just turn up and knock on a door, as far as I know, and say, can I speak to so-and-so? Anyway, he gets to see Miner. I mean, absolutely shocked, dumbfounded that he is an inmate. He's not one of the doctors treating the patients. He was an inmate. And they built up a relationship through words. It was totally through words. And this relationship lasted for years, and Miner carried on sending these things in. And Eliza started visiting him as well, and she visited him on a regular basis. So she would go down and visit Merritt, and they again formed a strange relationship because I'm not sure, because I haven't read this book now for 20 years. I just read it once, and it's probably packed away in the loft now. But I, as far as I know, that they got married. I may be wrong. I may be wrong, but it seemed to be some kind of loving relationship, as opposed to just mates, like he was with James Murray. And they formed this relationship, and Minor, he I'm not. I can't remember whether he was actually credited on the dictionaries, the early dictionaries, but these things were massive, and um, by the time of Murray's death, I think he'd only got up to the B's, something like that, and they just took a whole lifetime of getting up the A's. Um, so the authorities, there was an appeal from Murray to say, look, can you let him go? And he was deemed not safe. He was deemed that he's not safe to be let out. He used to harm himself. In fact, he actually castrated himself. That's how far he self-harming went. He castrated himself whilst in his cell, and he was deemed not safe to the public. So the parole board, or whatever board it is that he saw, actually wouldn't let him go. But after petitioning from Murray, they eventually said, we will let him go, but we're going to deport him to America. We don't want him wandering the streets over here. So they actually released him, but he was immediately deported back to USA. I don't think that Eliza Merritt went with him, so whether they were married or not, I don't know. But his mental health got worse. It didn't get any better by being released and sent back to America, and he suffered badly with his mental health throughout his life. And he probably outlived the lot of them, Eliza Merritt and James Murray, because he lived until he was 85. But he was a tortured man. He's all right saying, "Oh yeah, he had a good innings." Well, he didn't, did he? He had a long life, but really, he was a tortured man to the effect that he actually murdered someone, but he realised what he'd done was wrong. So it added to the mental torment that he had. But that is the story of Dr. William Chester Minor. Simon Winchester calls him the surgeon at Crowthorne. And as I say, if you get a chance, like have a read of the book. If you can't get a copy of it, pop down your library and order it. No doubt they'll be able to get it in for you and do it soon before they shut the libraries. But that's another story. Anyway, if you've got any thoughts on this, please let me know, and perhaps we can have a chat about it in the discussions. If you've enjoyed it, please give a thumbs up. If you've really enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel and help with the algorithm. But as I say, these are just stories that some I remember, the things that I've done, the things that I've read, the things that I've seen, films that I've seen. It could be anything. And I just sort of like sit down and go through them. And hopefully you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon.